MMA fighter Aaron Tex Johnson lost IT on board a Southwest flight, getting into a heated altercation with fellow passengers and crew. And it was so intense, he was forced off the plane before takeoff. The chaotic situation occurred at LaGuardia Airport on Monday, and thanks to a witness who started rolling, we have video, which shows the middleweight in a fiery argument with Southwest flight attendants as they attempted to remove him from the plane. After Johnson, 39, retrieved his bag from the overhead bin and headed towards the front of the plane, something seemed to make Tex snap in the clip. Johnson is seen screaming assault and abuse at the flight attendant and repeatedly warning her not to touch him. He was ultimately taken off the plane after what? A Southwest spokesperson described to TMZ Sports as belligerent and unruly behavior that the airline does not tolerate. Once he deplaned, Johnson's seemingly erratic behavior didn't end there. Another clip shows him inside the airport, restrained and on a stretcher, while launching an expletive-filled rant. Bulls, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I'm getting treated like a black person right now. Johnson yelled. Port Authority police said he was being transported to a local hospital for evaluation, and was issued a disorderly conduct summons. The passengers aboard that Monday morning flight were left in stunned silence, blinking in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. What began as a normal boarding experience had spiraled rapidly into a scene of rising tension and explosive emotion. Most had no idea who Aaron Tex Johnson was. To them, he was just another passenger, tall, broad man with the imposing presence of someone used to commanding space with his mere posture. But to MMA fans, Johnson was known for his fiery temper and aggressive grappling style inside the cage. A veteran of the sport, he had earned a reputation not just for his skill, but also for his volatility. Still, few would have anticipated the fury that would erupt that day in the confines of a commercial aircraft cabin. It's important to understand the kind of man Tex Johnson is. Born in Texas, raised hard, and carved out by a life filled with challenges, Johnson's path into the world of mixed martial arts wasn't just a career choice, was survival. He learned early on that strength was the only currency that mattered in certain environments. Inside the cage, he earned his stripes by choking out bigger opponents and staring down fear like it was a daily ritual. Outside the cage, though, things were messier. He wasn't just a fighter in the octagon. He was often fighting off personal demons' wands that didn't tap out so easily. On that fateful day at LaGuardia, many believe something in Tex simply cracked. According to multiple eyewitnesses, the confrontation began subtly. A flight attendant had approached Johnson regarding his seat assignment and his carry-on baggage, which allegedly didn't fit under the seat in front of him. While such interactions usually pass with little more than an eye roll or quiet compliance, something about the exchange ignited a fuse in Johnson. Passengers nearby later described a visible shift in his demeanor. His jaw clenched, his nostrils flared, and his body language grew defensive as if his instincts were no longer wired for cooperation. But combat by the time he stood up and retrieved his bag from the overhead bin, the cabin air had grown heavy with apprehension. His movements were sharp, not frantic, but purposeful, like a man preparing for a confrontation. The flight crew, now on edge, tried to calmly de-escalate the situation. But that's the thing about someone like Johnson. When he feels cornered, when he feels provoked, there's no middle ground. You're either with him or against him. And in that moment, everyone on that plane became the enemy in his eyes. As captured in the now viral video, Johnson began shouting accusations, calling the flight attendants' actions abusive and warning her not to touch him. Over and over again, he screamed assault and abuse, his voice echoing through the narrow fuselage. The tension spread like wildfire. Nearby, passengers froze in their seats. Children began to cry. Some passengers quietly reached for their phones. Others looked toward the emergency exits as if expecting something even worse to unfold. It wasn't just a disruption anymore. It was a moment of collective fear. The flight crew, now visibly shaken, made the decision to remove him from the aircraft. According to a Southwest Airlines spokesperson, Coca's behavior was deemed belligerent and unruly, a polite corporate euphemism for what those on board described as a meltdown. The company emphasized that such behavior is never tolerated, and added that the crew acted according to established safety protocols as he was escorted off the plane. Johnson's anger didn't abate. In fact, it seemed to amplify. On the tarmac and later within the airport terminal, he continued to lash out, verbally attacking airline personnel and anyone nearby. By the time Port Authority police intervened, it was clear that Johnson wasn't just having a bad day. He's in a full psychological tailspin. What happened next shocked even his most hardened fans. A second video began circulating online, showing Johnson restrained on a stretcher. His arms buckled down as he hurled obscenities at airport staff. Red-faced and drenched in sweat, he screamed at the top of his lungs. "Bulls, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I'm getting treated like a black person right now." The remark ignited a second wave of backlash, this time not just about his behavior, but about the racial insensitivity of his words. Some interpreted the comment as an attempt to invoke systemic injustice. Others saw it as a tone-deaf and offensive outburst from a man clearly spiraling out of control. Johnson was subsequently transported to a nearby hospital for evaluation. Authorities stated that his behavior warranted immediate psychiatric assessment. Though he wasn't officially arrested, he was issued a summons for disorderly conduct, a legal slap on the wrist that paled in comparison to the reputational damage already done. But the story doesn't end with Johnson being wheeled away on a stretcher. It begins there. In the days that followed, MMA forums and social media lit up with debates, speculation, and concern. Was Johnson under the influence of drugs? Was he suffering from a mental health crisis? Was this just the latest example of an athlete failing to transition from the high adrenaline world of professional combat into the quieter rhythms of civilian life? Friends and former teammates began to weigh in. Some expressed shock, others disappointment, but many shared a common thread of concern. According to those close to him, Tex had been struggling for months. He'd been vocal in interviews about the emotional toll of his fighting career. The constant pressure to stay relevant in a brutal sport, and the creeping sense of isolation that comes when the cheers fade and the spotlight moves on. There were whispers of depression, failed relationships, financial strain, and the overwhelming psychological burden that often accompanies combat sports veterans after retirement. One coach who had worked with Johnson in his early years said, "Tex is a warrior, but he's also a human being. People forget that. They see the muscles, the tattoos, the highlight reel knockouts. But they don't see what happens when the cage door closes for the last time and no one's calling anymore." For Johnson, that plane ride may have been less about a bad interaction with a flight attendant and more about years of bottled-up frustration finally boiling over in the worst possible place. Airports are already high-stress environments. 4. Someone with emotional instability or PTSD, a condition not uncommon among former fighters. It can become a pressure cooker. Psychologists weighed in publicly as well, noting how common it is for athletes, particularly those involved in combat sports, to struggle with identity, impulse control, and mental health challenges after stepping away from competition. The adrenaline highs, the structured training camps, the ritual of preparing for war, all of that disappears, leaving a void that many are unequipped to fill.